To continue on with the module dealing with the legal environment of the public service, there's a couple of things I'd like to bring up that are sort of mentioned in a sort of a way in the text, and sort of expand on those a little bit to give you some idea of the central argument that I'm making throughout this course, and that is the politicized nature of public sector labour relations. If you look at the introduction to this chapter, chapter 3 in the text, it does go back and describe to you how difficult it was for public employees to actually get rights that are now commonly understood to be constitutionally protected and more laterally statutorily protected. So it's very, very difficult. And the tradition of that grew out of English common law, and the English common law had a basis in the relationship between the employers and the employees called a master-servant relationship. That's the actual language of the legislation, and that continues until the 19th and the beginning of the 19th century, the early 20th century. So that was imported. That idea of a relationship of dominance was imported into the United States. Now, the problem is, of course, the United States became so enormous and so large, and the public service became remarkably bigger, and the ideology of the United States was very, very different from that of the United Kingdom. For example, you're a citizen of the United States. In the United Kingdom, you're a subject, and that's what's on your passport. The bearer is a subject of her Britannic Majesty and so forth. So it's a different way of looking at things. And the ideology changed in the United States in the 1960s, as I mentioned earlier, with the Kennedy administration supporting the union movement, a reciprocal arrangement. Remember, Kennedy supporting the unions are supporting Kennedy. Now, on the other side of the coin, you have, of course, the Nixon administration, you have Bush, and the two Bushes, and who are opposed to unions. What's not discussed in the text is just how significant this opposition was to unions particularly public sector unions, by the Republicans. When Ronald Reagan became president, although he was a former union member himself, he was staunchly anti-union, and the AFL had taken positions against him, although most of the membership of the AFL tended to like the Gipper. One union stood up in favor of him, a professional air traffic controllers organization called PATCO. And Robert Poli, the president of PATCO, supported Reagan in his bids for presidency. As soon as Reagan was inaugurated as president, however, PATCO were involved in a nasty series of disputes with the federal government on labor relations, and PATCO threatened and did, in fact, go on strike. And Reagan annihilated them. I mean, the union was destroyed, disbanded, broken up, and it sent a very, very strong message to the labor movement about what the position of the government, the federal government, would be. It's not going to be violent. It's not going to be like in the private sector. You're not going to be tossed out of your house and so forth. But the argument, as the text points out, is sovereignty. You do not have rights against a sovereign government. Now that goes sort of against the way of thinking in this country, where you have rights, where the government has limited rights, and you are the owners of rights, not the government. So you have this conflict that's between the Democrats with the ideology of sort of liberalism, basically, playing out the idea that rights are extremely important, and you have the idea, and on the other side of the coin, you have the Republicans who are arguing for sovereign government, and it cannot be interfered with by individual citizens, or particularly by groups of citizens. So generally speaking, Republicans have been opposed to the expansion of public employee rights, and generally speaking, the Democrats have been in favor of those sorts of things. Not the opposition to public employee rights is much stronger in the Republican Party than the favoritism is in the Democratic Party. When Clinton became president, he basically changed some of the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act, giving slightly more rights to public employees. But the damage done by the Reagan administration to public employee organizations, and then the subsequent damage done by the Bush administration, Bush 2, to public employee rights is pretty astonishing. The creation of the Homeland Security Organization and the organizations revolving around Homeland Security gave an incredible opportunity for the Republican administration to essentially eliminate rights for public sector employees. And as you know, those people were excluded from coverage of the law. After a long political fight, some of the rights have been restored. But the important point to understand is that this is a conflict, and that in this conflict, you have, by and large, democratic administrations who tend to be voted for by union members, who will then support the expansion of whatever rights they might be asking for. And you have, on the other side of the coin, you have Republicans who, generally speaking, will vote against the expansion of the rights of public employees, and will not support legislation that, even to the extent of expanding the scope of bargaining. I mean, it's not a particularly big step to say, maybe we should talk to these people over wages and benefits, but that's not acceptable at the federal level. At the state level, it's very different, because it shifts depending on what sort of state you're in, and it even shifts within the state. In California, Arnold, for our former governor, tried to do a job on public employee unions, and in a very, very strange coalition. I mean, really, really unusual coalition of unions. The police, the fire, and the teachers got together and hammered him. Again, a Republican governor trying to restrict the bargaining ability and the political power of public employee unions, and a Democrat, Gray Davis, who, as you know, was recalled and Arnold became governor. Gray Davis sort of expanding employee rights, and of course Jerry Brown, Democrat, but sort of expanding public employee rights. Historically, he's been on that side, and historically the union movement has supported him. So the point here is that the laws are extraordinarily important in influencing the ability of public employee unions to achieve their ends. You have a state that's favorably inclined towards unions, such as California, then in many cases they're going to get some of the sorts of things they want. If you have a state that's really, really opposed to unions, and public employee unions in particular, then that's not going to happen. What the Republicans, while they generally detest unions, what they're specifically concerned about is unions that become involved in the political process, because they see the union movement as the main supporter of the Democratic Party, or one of the main supporters. And so what they want to do is to try and reduce the ability of the union to channel funds into the Democratic Party. And that's what's going on with this fair share legislation. That's an attempt by them to do that. Democrats, on the other hand, will tend not to support Republicans, because Republicans are not in favor of legislation that the unions want. So you have this standoff, and it's pretty clear who's been winning for the last 30 years. I mean, the union movement in the United States is devastated. 8% of workers in the private sector, 8 to 9% of workers in the private sector belong to unions, maybe 20%, 22% in the public sector, depending on how you count people. Okay, more later.